First, Minister of Finance, we welcome you back to the country, and sorry we have to bundle you here despite all your arrangements for today. We didn't know you would be out by the time we made the arrangements. So we just want you to give us the summary. Thank you. I want us to give us a summary of the medium-term expenditure framework documents in terms of revenue expected from our MDAs. We don't want to go into all the nitty-gritties, so that we can direct our attention to that expectation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chairman and Deputy Chairman, as well as members of the Finance Committee of the House of Reps. Let me start by apologizing for coming in late. I wasn't aware of this public hearing until the chairman called me this morning. We have tried to circulate a document. I hope members now have a copy on the MTEF. So the document is a copy like this. I hope members have copies. And I will be guided by the directive of the chairman to concentrate more on the revenue aspect. But I will also speak very broadly on the expenditure, because the size of the expenditure is also very critical for your review, Chairman and members. I will start my presentation from slide number 4, which is reading Introduction and Background. The draft MTEF for 2023 to 2025 has been prepared against the backdrop of continuing global and domestic challenges in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic. Factors that are impacting the medium-term fiscal outlook include the Russia and Ukraine war, the resurgence of COVID-19 in some major economies, which is resulting in slowdown on economic activities in those countries, including China, renewed and elevated inflation in most economies, prompting monetary tightening in these economies, with the inherent negative impact on capital inflow to emerging economies like Nigeria, challenging domestic macro and business environment, as well as the negative impact of insecurity on the domestic economy. At slide number 5, the Nigerian economy has, despite these challenges, sustained its recovery from recession for the 5th consecutive quarter, 6 quarters, if I may amend this, because last week we released our 2nd quarter GDP report for Q2 2022. So while Q1 2022 was 3.11%, this has appreciated to 3.54% in the 2nd quarter of 2022. Most sectors of the economy record positive growth. This broad-based growth reflects the effective implementation of the plans that we have been implementing with the support of the Parliament. At slide number 6, just to update the committee that the IMF projects global growth to slow down from an estimated 6.1% in 2021 to 3.6% in 2022 and the same rate in 2023. Nigeria continues to be exposed to risk aversion in the global capital markets, which will put further pressure on the foreign exchange market as foreign portfolio investors that have left our country are yet to return to the Nigerian market. The CBN expects the renewed pressure on the foreign exchange market and the accompanied Naira depreciation to begin to subside from the 3rd quarter of 2023. I will now report briefly on an overview of the fiscal outcomes of current year 2022, as well as give an update on the 2022 Federation revenue performance. At slide number 8 is a report on the performance of the budget parameters, and this includes the oil production, which has been appropriated at 1.6 million barrels per day, but the actual outturns by July is an average of 1.32 million barrels per day. The crude oil price, which was appropriated at $73 per barrel for 2022, has improved significantly to $103.6 per barrel. Exchange rate, which was appropriated at 410 naira 15 kobo to the US dollar, is now slightly up to 415.19 to the US dollar. Inflation, which we projected to be at an average of 13%, is now up to 17.71%. And this is as at July. It has, from all indications, it's still continuing to climb up. The GDP growth, which we had projected for 2022 to close at 4.2, we are moderating and adjusting it down to an actual of 3.11% as at the reporting period of July. Chairman and members, at slide 9, the average crude oil price, we all know, has been growing in the crude oil market, and this is supposed to have been an advantage to us, seeing as our budget was fixed at 73 and we have an average of 103. However, the higher oil price is offset by lower oil production output, which as at April stood at 1.32, and even up to July is still averaging the same. NNPC attributes this fall in production to the high incidence of crude oil theft and pipeline vandalization. Exchange rate, inflation, and GDP growth varied adversely from the targets that we have set. You can see from the report at slide 8. Growth is, however, expected to accelerate, given efforts to contain structural issues impacting adversely on the cost of doing business in Nigeria. At slide number 10, is a report on the oil revenue performance. At slide number 10 is a report on the oil revenue performance. The gross oil and gas federation revenue for the full year 2022 was projected at 9.37 trillion. As at April, what was generated was 1.23 trillion, and this is as at April. And this is against what should have been generated at 3.12 trillion by April, representing a mere 39% oil and gas revenue performance. Despite higher oil prices, oil revenue has been underperforming due to the significant lower oil production shortfalls. And the main reasons, as I reported earlier on, had to do with pipeline vandalization and theft, and also which has resulted in oil production shut-ins by most of the major oil-producing entities. There's also higher petroleum subsidy cost, which is due to the higher landing cost of imported refined petroleum products into the country. As you know, honorable members, the higher the crude oil price in the international market, the higher the cost of PMS that is imported into the country. So non-oil taxes, on the other hand, have performed creditably well, averaging an average performance of 92.6% against the prorated target. Revenue performance is expected to improve in the second half of 2022 as a result of the concerted efforts to address the oil theft and pipeline vandalization. There is also seasonality in non-oil taxes, such as company income tax, which means that we expect to collect significantly more in non-oil revenues as well in the second half of 2022. The improved revenue collection should also moderate the debt service to revenue ratio, which is currently above our target level. At slide 11 is a tabulation of what I had presented as slide 10. So I'd like to move forward to slide 12. Again, this slide 12 is reporting on the Federation and VAT pool account distribution. The amount that is available was available for distribution from the main pool, the Federation account, again, is 1.52 trillion. Of this amount, the federal government has received 802.5 billion, while the states and the local governments received 407.04 billion and 313.81 billion, respectively. The federal, state, and local governments received 107.67 billion, 358.90 billion, and 251.23 billion, respectively, from the VAT pool. At slide 13 is a tabulation of the distribution as presented in slide 12. I want to now move up to an update on the 2022 budget expenditure performance, and this will be very high level, Honorable Chairman and members. As at April, federal government's retained revenue was only 1.6 trillion, which represents 49% of the prorated target of 3.32 trillion. The federal share of oil revenue was 39%, while non-oil revenue was an aggregate of 92%. But you can see that company income tax was 99%, while VAT was 98% performance. And we expect even higher performance in the second half of the year. Customs collections, on the other hand, is 76.77%, representing 25.42%, much lower than what was projected in the appropriation. Other revenues amounted to actual collection as at April, 664.64 billion, of which independent revenue is 394.09 billion. I'd like to state here, honorable members, that we are seeing increasing performance of independent revenues because of the Finance Act that you passed, which has pegged the revenue to expenditure ratio of government-owned enterprises to 50-50. At slide 16, the aggregate expenditure for 2022 is 17.32 trillion. That is the budget size that was passed by the Parliament. With a prorated spending of 5.77 trillion as at the end of April, the actual spending as at 31st of April was 4.72 trillion. Of this amount, 1.94 trillion was for debt service, 1.26 trillion was for personnel costs, and as at the end of April, 773.63 billion has been spent on capital expenditure. At slide 17, reporting on the deficit performance. The fiscal deficit for 2022 is estimated to be 7.32 trillion, and that is 3.09 trillion deficit as at April, that is prorated. And this, 3.09 trillion is the actual deficit as at April, and this reflects 636.97 billion above the prorated target. So deficit has been running at a rate higher than expected when you consider it to the actual revenue performance. The level of borrowing is 1.05 trillion, and this is ahead of the prorated target as at April. And this is so because we decided to front-load the borrowing so that we have more resources to release earlier in the year to avoid a situation where during the last quarter of the year we're releasing capital funds and agencies are not able to use it. So this was by design that we front-loaded the borrowing, especially the domestic borrowing. I'm moving on now to the 2023 to 2025 medium-term expenditure framework and to speak to the assumptions and the macroeconomic framework. This MTEF is prepared following a number of key parameters, as well as a consideration of the macroeconomic projections that are driving medium-term revenue and expenditure, and the revision that we have had to make to bring the projections in line with emergent realities. The new figures are presented in this table below. We had made amendments to what was projected in our medium-term development plan, the 2021 to 2025, but we had to adjust for things like growth and inflation to bring this to current realities. So the oil price is if I may just move to slide 20, the medium-term projections deviate from the National Development Plan, and this have been done based on a combination of the current realities and a modified medium-term outlook. In the MTEF, the real GDP growth is 3.75% in 2023, from a revised projection of 3.55% for 2022. Growth is expected to moderate to 3.3% in 2024 before picking up to 3.46% in 2025. Inflation is projected to grow to an average of 17.16% in 2023, up from the revised average of 16.11% in 2022. There will be upward pressure on prices, which is expected to be driven by the current lag effect of the global price surge due to the Russia-Ukraine war. There's also the pressures from domestic insecurity, the rising cost of imports, as well as the exchange rate depreciation, as well as the other supply-side constraints. Growth at slide 21, growth in nominal consumption has been adjusted also in line with the revised estimate based on changes in the components of the GDP and the historical performance. The medium-term nominal projection is projected, consumption, I beg your pardon, is projected to be 121.93 trillion and 123.69 trillion and 125.45 trillion for 2023, 2024, and 2025, respectively. Investment, especially from foreign sources, is expected to be dragged down by interest rate hikes in advanced economies, foreign exchange management concerns, as well as other domestic challenges, including insecurity. At slide 23, is an overview of the 2023 to 2025 medium-term revenue framework. The projected fiscal outcomes in the medium term are presented under, we presented them to the leadership of the National Assembly and to the Federal Executive Council. We presented two scenarios. Scenario one was a business as usual scenario. This assumed that the subsidy on PMS is estimated to have been 6.72 trillion for the full year. That is, if we decide to keep subsidy from January to December. Scenario two is what we call the reform scenario. This assumes that PMS subsidy will remain only up to June, that is mid-year 2023, based on the 18-month extension that was announced earlier in 2021, based on which the 2022 budget was amended, in which case only 3.36 trillion will be provided for in the 2023 appropriation. Additionally, there will also be tighter enforcement of performance management framework for government-owned enterprises that will significantly increase operating surplus as well as dividend remittances in 2023. Both scenarios, of course, have implications for net accretion to the Federation account and the projected revenue deficit. I must report here that the Federal Executive Council chose to approve scenario two, which is to say that the PMS subsidy will be provided only for January to June. And that is what is conveyed to the Parliament for consideration. At slide 24 is a table that shows the oil and gas revenues. And you will see that the oil production has been projected to be at 1.69 million barrels per day, with a projected crude oil price per barrel of $70 and an average exchange rate of 435 naira 57 kobo to the US dollar. So I'll be going through scenario two because that is what was formally presented to the Parliament. And I apologize because we didn't have time to adjust this. We just printed and came. It will mean that the total oil and gas revenue with these parameters will be 8.5 trillion, out of which 13% derivation will be 1.105 trillion, with a net oil and gas revenue after 13% derivation of 7.3 1.396 trillion. There will be also other deductions of other statutory deductions of 3.537 trillion. So federally funded oil and gas revenues, we have projected to have stopped in 2022 because of the transiting of NNPC to NNPC Limited. The only assumption we are keeping is that the Federation will be bearing the cost of subsidy as opposed to the NNPC. And also there's one line item which is titled PMS under recovery, which is a historical item that has been amortized over a couple of years that is still being repaid back. So only these two items. So other upstream projects such as National Gas Development, Gas Infrastructure Project, Crude Oil Export Inspection Expenses, Frontier Exploration, Renewable Energy Development, Pipeline Security Costs, Pre-Export Financing, all of these are projected to be carried by the NNPC, new NNPC Limited. With this scenario too, it will mean that the net oil and gas revenue after costs and deductions will be 3.858 trillion naira. If you just look at scenario 1, if we hold on to 12 months for subsidy, this net oil and gas revenue will have been 500 billion naira. So 2014, we're assuming, and 2015 that there will be no 2024 and 2025, we're assuming that there will be no PMS subsidy in those outer years. And you will see how the revenue, the net oil and gas revenue, has moved up to 7.6 trillion and 7.5 trillion, respectively. As slide 26 is a tabulation at 26. Oh, 25. Where's 25? You have? Okay. Okay, I think maybe it's the numbering, but okay. So at the next slide is still further details of the revenue broken down into the share of oil revenue, showing the dividends from NLNG and dividends from other sources like Bank of Industry. We also show the mineral share of revenue, and also non-oil revenue taxes such as company income tax, VAT, customs, and share of the Federation account. There's also indicated in that page the share of electronic money transfer, which was formerly called stamp duty, the share of oil price royalties, the share of revenues from government-owned enterprises, and the government-owned enterprises operating surpluses. That is the 80% which is captured as independent revenue. There's also the independent revenues from the non-GOEs. Then there's a drawdown from special accounts, which we are projecting will also be appropriated. There's signature bonuses. This is input from the Upstream Regulatory Authority. There's domestic recoveries, as well as grant and donor funding. So these are loans that we are projecting will be drawn down during these periods. There's also the Education Tax Fund. So with all of this at scenario 2, you will see that from the amount available for FGN budget, including government-owned enterprises retained revenue, the total amount will be 7.2 trillion. And the total amount that will be available for FGM budget will be 8.46 trillion when you add all of the non-oil revenues plus the oil revenues. So in addition to subsidy reform, scenario 2 assumes an aggressive implementation of the cost-to-income limits of the government-owned enterprises. And with this, in 2023, the federal government revenue is projected to be 8.4 trillion. This is 15% higher than the 1.51 trillion or 1.1 1.51 trillion less than the 2022 budget, but it is 2.12 trillion more than what will have been in scenario 1. Of this 8.48 trillion, 1.99 trillion, or 23%, is projected to come from oil-related sources, while the whole of the balance is from non-oil sources. In the next slide, which is a continuation reporting the federal government expenditure as scenario 2, which is the scenario that is presented to Parliament, the federal government 2023 aggregate expenditure is projected to be 19.76 trillion. This is inclusive of government-owned enterprises. In this scenario, the budget deficit is projected to be 11.30 trillion in 2023. This is up from 7.35 trillion in 2022. This represents 5.01% of the estimated GDP, above the 3% threshold as stipulated in the Fiscal Responsibility Act. Again, at the next slide, again on scenario 2, the budget deficit is projected to be 11.30%. If we are trillion, if we are to assume that there will be no subsidy in 2023, we have a chance to bring this down to the threshold that is allowed by the Fiscal Responsibility Act, because that will be 3.35 trillion less in terms of deficit. Honorable members, Chairman, honorable members, this draft MTEF has been prepared again against the backdrop of very significant continuing global challenges, and there's an overall fiscal risk which are quite elevated following weaker than expected domestic economic performance and structural issues in the domestic economy. Revenue generation remains the major fiscal constraint of the federal government. The systemic resource mobilization problem has been compounded by recent global recessions. We do hope that the work of this honorable committee and its members will help us to further drive upwards the revenue-generating performance of our economy. We will need to all focus on improving tax administration and collection efficiency. Crude oil production challenges also need to be addressed, as PMS subsidy that has been deducted by NMPC has actually constituted a significant threat to the achievement of our revenue growth targets in the oil and gas sector, as seen in the performance of 2022 and even in the projections for 2023. We need to take continuously bold and decisive and very urgent action to be able to address the issues of revenue underperformance and also to enhance expenditure efficiency at both the national as well as at the subnational levels. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and honorable members, for the opportunity to meet with you today.
Honorable colleagues, question, please.
Mr. Chairman, is your visitor?
Yes, please. Honorable Sada.
The 2023-2025 MTEF, oil and gas revenues and federally funded upstream project cost. Are we there? Line item pipeline security and maintenance cost. As the amended framework for 2022, we're projecting 8-point-something billion. And then with the issues raised by the honourable ministers and those that are in the public domain, the pipeline vandalization and oil theft, are we really getting value for money if we can spend 8-point-something billion and yet we are crying to the public that our oil is being stolen and then we are experiencing nationwide pipeline vandalization, even though we know that some of the pipelines across the country are not functioning because they are not pumping oil or PMS to the depots. We know that. So are we really getting value for money to spending 8-point-something billion for security of our pipeline and maintenance? Then, Mr. Chairman, go down, Mr. Chairman. Refinery rehabilitation is zero. And yet they are telling us they are refurbishing the refineries. I don't know where they're getting the money. Then, can the Honourable Minister kindly educate the Nigerian public the level we are on Nigeria-Morocco pipeline, where we are spending 9-point-something billion. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The last paragraph of page 20. It says upward pressure on prices is expected to be driven by the current and lag effect of the global price. Upward pressure. That's the underlying factor. If we expect to have upward pressure on prices, why are we pegging our budget price to $70? Our minister, presently, we have a production level of about 1.3 million barrels per day, actual, as against our 1.9. Now you are proposing this budget is based on 1.69. This MTEF, sorry, based on 1.69. While in 2024, 1.83. 2025, 1.83. What's the guarantee that we can move from where we are now, of 1.32 to 1.69? I don't know the plans that have been put in place to curb the vandalization and the stealing of our oil. If the minister can guide us, that will enable us to take a decision. Honorable colleagues, if you go to your page 27, page 27, some are not, okay. FGN expenditure, the overview, that's the one I'm referring to. Scenario 2, we have had the minister's presentation where our deficit is projected to be 11.30 trillion as against our 7 this year. What it means to us is that we've lost too much revenue and we expected to take a decision on the floor on behalf of Nigerians, whether or not we want to adopt scenario 2, which is before us. In other words, fund subsidy for the next till June as proposed. I'm just calling your attention to it. For a deficit of 11, she has said that if we decide to adopt Is it that if we decide to adopt scenario 2, it will come down to 3 point something, you said?
If you decide to further improve on scenario 2, which means to remove fuel subsidy altogether, it means we will have a savings of 3.35 trillion.
Which means if we remove,
Yes.
we almost come down to our 7.70 trillion.
Yes, that's what it means.
So, honorable colleagues, that's Honourable Minister, those are my own observations and questions. Yes, please.
That we are estimating on this 11-point-something deficit and the increase in the yes, I mean 2020. It's 2020, 2023. It's 2023 because it's the estimate we are preparing for. We need to know the level of performance that we are either increasing the size of the budget and at the same time the expected deficit that we are planning. Also, too, in page 19 and 20, vis-a-vis the growth rate you referred to, can you please explain to us what informed this growth that is expected to be moderated at 3.30 in 2024, this projection? Your projected growth that we declined from 3.75 to 3.30 in 2024 before picking up. What is informing such a projection and others? Thank you.
For finance, I want to take us to your conclusion on slide 21. That's your page 21 here. The last conclusion where you said investments, especially from foreign sources, is expected to be dragged down by interest rate hikes in advanced economies, foreign exchange management, and other concerns that you raised. And my question is, since this is your conclusion, this is your anticipation for the future, can't we just have a kind of have a reduction of interest by the central bank to our local industries so that they can bridge this deficit that we're already expecting, that you have anticipated, so that local industries can be boosted if they have good interest? Then, as an addendum to what my colleague said on this oil revenue performance, in your slide 10, where you said the gross oil gas federation revenue for 2022 was projected at 9.3 trillion, and as at April we have only 1.2, and then what you projected then was 3.1 trillion. Meaning that we're losing 61% of our oil production to theft. 61%. 39% performance, meaning the thieves are taking 61%. That is huge. And if it is that huge, how is that possible? With the amount of money that you have budgeted into that security, I want you to look at it very well. Because if the whole federation is just getting 1.2 and thieves are getting 2.something trillion, and the whole federation, the whole of Nigeria is getting 1.2, how do we...
We'll take an MPC on that. We'll take an MPC. Finance is just to receive the money. Honorable Stanley.
This exercise can be meaningful to you and I, but in plain English, 70% of Nigeria don't understand all this MTEF or whatever vocabulary we use. At this point, I know most countries, they are looking for ways to stimulate their economy in ways of stimulus packages. What do we have in place for ordinary Nigerian who don't understand MTEF or what this, because this exercise to them, pardon my language, is useless if they cannot eat. So, Honorable Minister, to speak to Nigerians and tell them how this document or your presentation is going to put food on the table. We're the closest to Nigerians. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Responsibility Act stipulation of 3 issue of removing subsidy and other things. What other things can we do that you can meet that threshold? Is there any plan to do other things that will reduce threshold from 5.01 and 5.50, as the case may be? Thank you.
Honorable Minister, this will be the first time the first MTEF and budget will be processing after the passage of PIA, and I'm sure Nigerians will be interested in knowing the financial implications of the PIA on our revenue projections. So I think it will not be out of order to use this opportunity to enlighten Nigerians on what the financial implications of the passage of PIA would be on our budget 2023 and going forward. Then also, I tried to do a comparative analysis of what is obtainable in other climes as against what is happening here. In 2020 to be precise, I think South African Revenue Services generated an amount that when converted to Naira will give you an amount that is over 30 trillion Naira. And I know last year we celebrated 6-point-something trillion Naira. What can we do differently to be able to measure up, given the fact that we said our economy is the biggest in the whole of the continent? What are the things that we need to do? I understand that in page 23 you talked about tighter enforcement of the performance management framework for GOEs. What can we do differently to show up our revenue base, given that others are doing much, much better than we're doing now? Thank you.
Thank you.
Chairman and honorable members, for the very close attention you had paid to our presentation and for the questions that you have asked. First, I want to start with the question that was raised by Honorable Sada, and he was referring to what value are we getting for money for the 8.2 billion that is spent for pipeline pipeline security. I will have said from what has happened in 2022, clearly what we are spending is not giving us much value because production continues to decline. And what this means is whatever we're doing is not working, and therefore we have to do something that is radically different. My understanding is that the security agencies and the National Oil Company Limited, as well as the regulators, have been working very hard to find solutions, and what they tell us is that they are beginning to see improvements. But we're waiting for the production numbers to see. We saw that from the performance in April at 1.3 million barrels per day, that in July it was 1.4 million barrels per day. But we do hope that the increase will be very significant because it's costing us not just 8.2 billion in terms of security costs, but it's costing us the revenue that we're losing that will have earned. At 39%, oil and gas revenue as at April is a very, very low performance. We need to be able to bring it up. As far as non-oil revenue is concerned, you will see that as at April, the performance was about 92%. So we need to be able to move oil and gas revenue also to that threshold. And on the issue of the Morocco-Nigeria gas pipeline, the Federal Executive Council a few weeks ago approved funding for the feasibility study, so which means that it is still at the feasibility study phase. And where it is exactly, the details can be provided by the National Oil Company. But you will see that in the MTEF for 2023 to 2025, we had removed the Federation spending on that, assuming that with the transition of NNPC to NNPC Limited, that they will be carrying that cost directly, not the Federation, along with other costs, all the other costs that the Federation used to carry. We assume that will be, again, that's to respond to what is the implication of the PIA. The PIA has given the NNPC some independence from the Federation, and also, as a registered company now under CAMA, they have to perform in line with the laws of the Company and Allied Matters Act. And a lot of the expenditure that, upstream expenditure that the Federation used to carry will now be carried by the NNPC Limited itself. So that in itself is a significant relief. NNPC will be paying taxes and dividends, and we believe in the medium term the Federation will end up earning more revenue than it was earning previously from the activities of the NNPC. It also means that the NNPC will need to go and borrow money on its own balance sheet. That will force improved efficiency on the NNPC Limited, and we're from the projections of their own business plan, they are projecting to be profitable even from year one. In fact, in the last 2021, they have reported profit, but we know that that is due to some audit adjustments, but they are projecting from year one also they'll be profitable. So they'll be paying dividends, royalties, which they were not paying before to the Federation. We're seeing a situation where the NNPC Limited will be performing as well as the NLNG is performing at this time. That is our hope and projection. On the issue of the upward pressure on prices, we're just reporting what we're seeing as a reality, as inflation is going up consistently globally, and also as it appears that the war between Russia and Ukraine is not abating. What we're projecting is that there will be continuous pressure on prices. And what we have to do as a government is to look at how we can cushion those pressures to relieve the inflationary trend that will be going up. And as to why we are budgeting or projecting $70 per barrel when the actual crude oil price is now 103, groups like EIA that are specialists in projecting oil prices are projecting a decline in the oil prices from 2023. Perhaps that will change, but we're just following the general guideline that we see. And this is information that we have reviewed, but that also NNPC has provided. And the fact that also we're not able to take a grip and confirm a significant increase in production, we feel it's safer to be also lower on the price. But perhaps as this work of MTEF is going on, we can undertake more reviews and pass to you some of the research information that we have based on which this decision is taken. On the production, we are projecting 6.19 million barrels per day, based on and up to 1.8 in 2024, based on the projection of the NNPC itself. They're projecting that all the measures that are taken now is going to result in increased production going forward. And we do hope that this works out, because if it doesn't, the deficit situation we have found ourselves in will be even worse. The FGN expenditure overview we have presented is based on scenario 2. We hope that the Parliament also agrees to scenario 2 or an improved version of scenario 2. Our belief is that the PMS subsidy is costing us more as a federation. The benefit that we're getting from it is not much in terms of what we're losing in revenue that could have been applied to education, to health, and to improvement in the lives of our people. So we do hope that the Parliament will consider Scenario 2 or an improved version of Scenario 2. And again, there was a question on what is the level of performance of the 2022 budget. We have presented that as the very first part, the performance in revenue as well as the performance in expenditure. We had presented the oil and gas revenue to be 39%, the non-oil revenue to be 92%, and that the expenditure performance is actually almost at par with the budget, while the deficit performance is slightly over the budget prorated as at April. On the investments slowdown, again, it's just being practical. If the business environment does not improve, when inflation rates are high globally and interest rates are high globally, it's difficult to see new investors coming into any economy. What this means for us is we should concentrate on how we can enhance the capacity of local investments to grow, because these are investors that are in country. One of the things that was asked is why can't the CBN reduce interest rates? It is difficult to expect a reduction in interest rates when inflation is growing. One of the tools that the central banks across the world use to manage inflation is to increase interest rates. It's a balancing act, and perhaps the central bank can provide more information as to why they are concerned. If you notice, the CBN has had to announce an increase of intervention fund rates from 5% to 9%, because the interest rates are generally going up globally. On oil revenue performance, I think the Honorable was saying that if the oil revenue is performing 39%, it means the whole of 61% is oil theft. It's not exactly like that, because we still get oil and gas revenues from other sources, such as royalties and taxes from hydrocarbon tax that is paid by the IOCs. The greatest impact for us is the equity crude sales, which we are not getting because the crude is not being produced. And the second greatest impact is because we need the crude to be able to undertake the DSDP arrangement where crude is swapped for PMS. It means we have to buy the PMS directly. We don't have enough crude to pay for that arrangement. So that's the impact. It's not exactly a one-to-one situation. And yes, we all have to look at various things that we will need to undertake to stimulate the economy so that ordinary Nigerians will not continue to suffer. I know that Mr. President is currently looking at fertilizer subsidy as one of the measures to reduce the cost of food. Also, Mr. President has directed the release of foods from strategic reserves, even as instructions have been given to replenish the reserves as they have gone down. We have tried in the past by reducing taxes for small businesses. With the support of the National Assembly, we reduced taxes from 30% to 25% for medium-sized enterprises. And also for small enterprises with turnover up to 25 million, they are paying zero company income tax as we speak. So these are fiscal measures that are supposed to enable these companies retain the revenues they generate so that they can continue to operate, grow, and retain jobs. The social investment program is also still running. There are aspirations to expand it, so that more people that are vulnerable or have become vulnerable due to the adverse economic conditions can receive small cash transfers, stipends to cushion their day-to-day lives. On the 3% deficit threshold, the Fiscal Responsibility Act allows government to exceed this 3% if, in the opinion of the President and with the support of the National Assembly, that there is a justification to do so. That is why we still presented the 5% for consideration of the Parliament. We hope it comes out more improved than what we have submitted, and we're standing by to support your work in that regard. And comparing Nigeria to South Africa, the comparison cannot be one-on-one, as the federal government's national budget compared to South Africa's national budget is also not proportionate. It is important to state that the South African economy is largely funded by taxes, unlike the Nigerian economy. The tax base of the Nigerian economy is still narrow. The tax rates are still quite low. VAT is still 7.5%. The average VAT rate even in the West African region is 15%. So we have the lowest tax rate in the world today, alongside, I think, second to Sudan, that has a little bit lower than that. Even Sudan is increasing its VAT rate now. So we need to all collectively work to increase the tax efficiency collections. We've started seeing improvements, but there's more that needs to be done at the federal, but especially at the state levels, because this aggregate tax rates that we report is for the whole of the federation. It's not federal government taxes alone. And then in Nigeria, if you look at the people, the personal income tax rate is very, very small. So there are individuals of high net worth, only a few of them are paying tax. The large majority are not paying taxes. The most compliant taxpayers are the very large corporates that cannot afford to be not to be compliant. But generally, Nigerians are not tax compliant. We also need to work towards increasing the efficiency in our business operations, both at the government as well as in the private sector. The cost of doing business is very, very high in Nigeria for a number of factors: deficit in electricity, security issues, and also even the regulatory environment and bureaucracy is costing so much to do businesses in Nigeria. I want to ask that a request that this committee considers an engagement with the National Oil Company. They can provide you more information on issues regarding production, on issues regarding the security of our pipelines, and also on what they told us is their new focus, to focus on deep offshore production, where the theft and the vandalization are very, very insignificant. So they have some plans, but it is better if the committee considers inviting the NNPC to give an update on this as well. I don't know if I've addressed all the issues. Which one? Which one, sir?
Ma. Sir, sorry, sir. There's something I need to ask.
Because she answered your question. You did
No,
not
but there's another one, sir, that I've not finished. Sorry, Chairman. Once of every year. In your document here, your projected official exchange rate, is it figures from CBN or is from your office? And if they are from your office, page 26, what inform all this your official exchange rate projection? Each time I ask this question, refer me to CBN. But
are you comparing it to black market rates?
If these are your figures here, if these ones are your figures here, you need to let us know. Because if it's CBN figure that you have here, then we'll wait for
Honorable colleagues,
you always
the minister, hold on, please. The Minister of Finance has presented you documents, and you are now asking whether it's her figures. Are you comparing the exchange rates, the official exchange rates, with the black market rate. I don't think, no, excuse me, this is Commissioner of Finance, excuse me, please. If you want to do business with government, I mean officially, you apply to the CBN and they'll give you official exchange rates. But if you feel that you are not getting the rates, the dollars, like the airlines waited for when dollars was available, then they could approach the black market if available. Please. Yeah, you spoke to the figures. That is the rates. So if you are suggesting that we should increase the exchange rate, then you make your point.
No, I'm talking about.
Let Nigerians know.
It's projecting.
To be what rate? What rate?
It's projected. He said that 2024 we will still have 354.9. Why 20? If he's not in charge of it, and I'm having this figure, these figures are from my office. What informed this projection?
What page are you referring?
Page 26. Except they are from CBN.
You know, every year you ask this question, yes. So let us...
2026, page 26.
Finally, Chairman.
Our Minister, maybe you educate us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me start by addressing the issue of the growth rate, which I
listen now.
Let me start by addressing the issue of the growth rate. The 2024 growth rate that we're projecting is moderated by the base effect from 2023. And the lag effect will wane, and therefore it moderates in 2025. On the issue of the performance of 2022, my first, second, and third part of the presentation gave an overview of the fiscal outcomes and the update on the 2022 revenue performance, as well as an update on the 2022 expenditure performance. So it is in sections 1, 2, 3 of the report. I gave the details, but the report that I submitted is as at April. We will update this to July because of the time that we had to rush here today, so that you have numbers up to July of the 2022 performance. On the official exchange rate, this is information that is provided by the central bank.
Decline in 2023. That is what I'm asking. It's been on the increase gradually. Then what is informing your moderation downward?
The base effect of the actual challenges in 2022 will show up in 2023. We have the Russia-Ukraine war. We have underperformance in crude oil revenue. We have the security challenges. All of that will have effect in the next year's reporting cycle. That's what we mean by the base effect.
By the passage of the PIA, we expected it will foster efficiency in the oil industry. So with the coming of NNPC Limited on board, please talk with them. There is the need for them to introduce incentive mechanism that will strengthen the security of our oil equipment. As long as they didn't do that, because of the nature of the terrain where our oil pipelines are, there is the need for them to deploy incentive mechanism. We have seen it working. It has worked in other jurisdictions. If they encourage you to go in deep sea, how much money do you have? How much money do they have to invest in deep sea exploration? We know the cost. So that is because by doing that, by improved security, improved investment inflow, which all the PIA is geared towards, I'm sure that will boost our oil production in the future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Various sources of raising money, if their balance sheets can cover them. And as long as the Federation is not pumping money there any longer, is a relief. What we expect from them, NMPC, is return on investments. So maybe this to DG budgets. We come in here every year to ask revenue agencies of their performance more historically. I want to have a copy of their performances from, as per your own record. And secondly, can we fine-tune this yearly ritual by you putting all agencies on first-line charge of what they are expected to pay automatically, so that when we don't need to ask them what they have paid, it is assumed that they have paid it automatically. I learned that only few agencies are on your first-line charge of 25%. So why can't we put all the agencies on this line so that we have more, then we will have control of our revenue at least.
DG, as a rider to what Dijama has just said, I think we'll also be interested in knowing the science behind your projected revenues that you allocate to MDS. I ask because I'm a bit worried that year in, year out, you have some sets of agencies that will come in here to report that they surpass their projected revenues. And what I get is either we are not challenging them in terms of giving them ambitious target, or I just don't understand. You, year in, year out, customs will come and say they've surpassed their target. MPA will come, they've surpassed their target. Are we really challenging them? Are we giving them ambitious targets that would make them to actually sit up and contribute, given the potential that they have? So I think we need to have such information also. Then finally, sir, to the Honorable Minister, I think about a month back or so, we read on the pages of newspapers that the SS crude account has been heavily depleted. And if we look at our projected revenue, our projected crude oil price as against the reality of the market today, one would expect that the ECA will be continuously funded. But the information we read on the pages of paper is that the account has been almost completely depleted. What's been happening to the excess money that we make from crude oil sales? Thank you.
By saying that we can provide the annual revenue performance of all the agencies to aid the work of the committee, and also DG Budget will speak to what we have done already in terms of taking the revenues upfront, and it's staggered. As what is the science behind the projected revenue when agencies like NCS and MPA are reporting over performance? If you look at the performance of NCS this year, it is not so, and that is because last year we actually really pushed it significantly forward. Again, when DG Budget reports on the actual performance for the agencies, MPA will also be provided. And we're hoping that during this process, any of the agencies that the revenues seems to be not appropriate enough, that they can be reviewed. Because the way to reduce the deficit is by removing expenditure that are wasteful, but also by increasing revenue. So the two needs to go side by side. On the ECA, for the past 4 years, we haven't had any revenue accruing into the ECA. What is excess revenue? Excess oil and gas revenue is revenue that exceeds the budget. And oil and gas revenue is price times volume. So even if the price is high, if the volume is low, you still don't reach the target. So today, as at April, the average price is $103 per barrel, But the performance for April aggregated for the oil and gas sector is 39%. So there's no excess to transfer to the EC.
So does the excess take care of the shortfall in terms of volume?
Oh, no excess.
There's
Don't
no,
use the word.
There's no excess.
Hold on. No, what's the difference between excess and difference? Hold on. Don't twist the thing. She has just told you we had a budget of 1.9 million barrels per day. Unfortunately, here we are with 1.32. So which means we have problems, serious problems. Please, this is very simple arithmetic.
Fortunately, for the past 4 years, for the oil and gas sector, we haven't been able to realize any excess revenue. It has always been short. So there has been no accruals during this period to the ECA. Meanwhile, there has been some approvals that has been given by the Federation, including the states, on security. And we had, over time, as security agencies were undertaking the projects, been providing the funds from that source.
Debt is very alarming. What can we do to get out of this as a Nigerian? Please, the amount using for servicing debt, I'm so concerned, and I'm sure many Nigerians too are concerned. If you can, thank you.
Debt service to revenue ratio, as I reported earlier on, is over what we projected and planned in the budget. In the budget, what we had planned was 60% revenue to debt. But we have had some months where the ratio goes up to 90%. But because in the budget we also provide for debt service, and consistently as revenue is accruing, we have a sinking fund where every month we take a certain proportion of revenue and put in the sinking fund. We have been able to consistently, without fail, service our debts. And we don't have any projections even in the near future that we will fail, because we actually follow a medium-term debt management strategy very, very strictly. The debts are not taken haphazardly. They are planned, they are appropriated, and then we borrow against the appropriation. But we do have pressures in terms of the ratio, because when revenue is underperforming, then it means we have problem being able to service all of government. The liquidity situation is very, very challenging. That's why what we need to do, all of us, including the Parliament, is to work towards increasing our revenue performance. Yes, you have been doing that, and we are beginning to see the improvement, but we need to keep pushing the bar, because we have pushback from a lot of agencies on this 50-50 ratio. I know some of them are hoping that the Parliament will give them exemptions. I hope that doesn't happen. And also, we need to, on an annual basis, like the Vice Chair has said, keep increasing the required performance of the revenue-generating agencies.